word round the campfire seems to be that both Mikey Garcia and Danny Garcia have agreed to terms for a fight in the fall. Plans for this fight do appear to have been pushed back, it being that the initial reports we were hearing back in the beginning of May stated that the proposed fight would be taking place sometime at the end of August. And then, like now, it was being pegged as a pay-per-view, a Fox Sports pay-per-view. Well, it appears they've pushed it back a bit, and now, rather than at the end of August, they're looking at a date potentially in October, with the Staples Center as one of the venue options. And for those of you out there that didn't manage to catch my initial reaction to what was then preliminary news, I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. Although you're gonna hear in that video, what you're about to hear right now, in this video, that I don't think this is a pay-per-view worthy fight. We all saw what Mikey Garcia looked like out there trying to campaign as a welterweight, quote-unquote, daring to be great. We all saw what he looked like. He looked like a fish out of water. He looked like a guy that don't belong up there. That's what he looked like. You charged people $75 to watch this guy go out there and do nothing but try to survive.
For $75.
So now what you're gonna do is you're gonna put that same guy at that same weight for that same pay-per-view price on pay-per-view again, except this time it's with Danny Garcia. And I gather that the marketing angle that they're going for is the Puerto Rico versus Mexico rivalry. That's what they're shooting for. They want to convince the fans that, you know, you got that rivalry, and it being that Danny Garcia, these days, you know, he's taken 1 or 2 losses, one to Keith Thurman, one more recently to Sean Porter, that maybe this fight will be more aesthetically pleasing because it's more competitive. That's what they're trying to convince you of, you understand? That's the sales pitch. They want you to view this as a more competitive fight, and they want to bill it as a Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry. And there's just one problem with that. Well, really, there's more than one, but let's talk about one. One problem that they've got, if they're trying to build this fight from that angle, is that, you know, the Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry, right?
In boxing.
We've seen this many times in the past. You know, Felix Trinidad versus Oscar De La Coca. Or Miguel Cotto versus Antonio Margarito. We've seen it before. But in this situation, Danny Garcia don't got the command of the Puerto Rican boxing fans that either Miguel Cotto had or Felix Trinidad had. So even with you trying to build this as a Puerto Rico versus Mexico rivalry, you know, Danny Garcia ain't equivocal to those guys. He is not the face of Puerto Rican boxing right now. I mean, let's just be honest. He doesn't have that rapport with the Puerto Rican fans. So just, you know, billing it as, oh, this Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry, that might not do it. You know, that if anybody's bringing paying customers to this fight, it would likely be Mikey Garcia more than Danny Garcia. This would be Danny Garcia's pay-per-view debut. You know, headlining a card, it's something like that. But then we look at Mikey Garcia's angle and what customers he could bring to the table. There's a problem there too, that what customers he brought to the table in the Errol Spence fight might be feeling buyer's remorse given how he performed. That this guy went out there, he was supposedly daring to be great, but he gets out there, bell rings, he doesn't fucking do nothing. For 12 rounds, he didn't do nothing.
$75.
So now you think those same people are gonna come right back and pay $75 again. I think the pay-per-view buys for that fight was something to the tune of, what was it? 360,000, close to 400,000, but roughly 360,000. That's what it did. That's how many people thought enough of that fight to buy it. Now, how many of those 360,000 people were feeling buyer's remorse as the fight played out and after the fight? That, you know what, Mikey don't belong up there. We can see that. That guy's not a fucking welterweight. He don't belong up there.
Move back down.
How many of those same 360,000 people that bought that Errol Spence fight are gonna come back and buy this fight when this is the very next fight they're gonna see Mikey Garcia in? And you know, just Mikey Garcia even being in the welterweight division right now, that's another indicator. That's another sign of what we're always talking about. That the PBC don't want to have to work with other people. Bottom line, they really don't. That if they can avoid that altogether, they will move heaven and earth to do so. Even if it means moving one of their better fighters, one of the best fighters they got, from 135, even if it means moving that guy all the way to welterweight, where he doesn't fucking belong.
They'll do it.
You know, right now, 135, that's basically top-ranked city. Between Vasil Lomachenko and Teofimo Lopez and the IBF champion Richard Comey, they pretty much got that division on smash. PBC don't want to work with them, and we know that. I mean, we know what kind of relationship they got. And you look at 140. 140 is a war zone. It's a fantastic weight class with very good fights coming up. But at the end of the day, the PBC doesn't have a hold over that weight class. You understand? They don't have a hold over 140 the way they got a hold over 154. Or the way they got, some prize stallions in the super middleweight division. So, if you're wondering, why the fuck is Mikey Garcia still at 147? Wasn't it clear enough in the Spence fight that he doesn't belong up there? I mean, if you're wondering why he's still there, just put 2 and 2 together. Connect the dots. I gather that in spite of how Mikey looked against Errol Spence, what fans remain in his corner, because he is a good fighter. I mean, I know a lot of people want to shit on him. I know a lot of people want to rib him for how he looked against Errol Spence, a naturally bigger guy who debuted as a junior middleweight, by the way. I know a lot of people have a lot of things to say about Mikey Garcia, but I still think he's a good fighter, depending on what weight he's fighting at. I don't think he belongs at 147 pounds, but at 135, yeah, I still think he's one of the best in the world. Those things in mind, what fans remain in his corner, in spite of that very lackluster showing against Spence, I still think those fans would be interested and intrigued in seeing him finally fight Vasyl Lomachenko. But rather than doing what they've got to do to make that fight a reality, they'd rather keep Mikey at 147, behind the guise of him daring to be great and he wants to be a 5-division champion. Look, more people are not interested in seeing you fight Danny Garcia than there were people interested in seeing you fight Vasyl Lomachenko. There were way more people interested in seeing that. And that fight seems to have lost all its steam, all its momentum. Vasyl Lomachenko's moving on. He's going to achieve the goal that he's been trying to achieve, trying to unify all the belts in one weight class to become an undisputed champion. And Mikey Garcia is being, tossed around, it looks like, from welterweight to welterweight.
Like a rag doll.
Like a fucking hand-me-down. So if you just want my opinion, if you came here to listen to my take and what I think about it, that's not a pay-per-view worthy fight. I'm not buying that fucking thing. I'll tell you that shit right now. I don't know if you are, but I'm not. And a lot of these guys that want to pretend that it's a pay-per-view worthy fight, that they want to, these PBC-loving motherfuckers, that they act like they work for them, like they're interns for the PBC. Look, here's reality. A lot of them motherfuckers ain't buying that shit neither. They gonna be fire sticking it up. They know it, I know it, and you know it, okay? So the bottom line is, I'm really not sure how many pay-per-views they could sell with this thing. I'm really not sure. But if 360,000 is what they did with the Errol Spence fight, how, out of that 360,000 people, out of those people, how many of those people are going to be willing to pay to see this guy campaigning as a welterweight yet again? That's the question. In other news, Michael Benson tweeted this. He says, Sergey Kovalev and Anthony Yarde have again agreed to terms to fight in Russia, according to Bob Arum. The bout was meant to happen in June 29th, but has been rescheduled for September. This time, the money will be guaranteed, so Yarde gets paid if it falls through, at IFL TV. And, I also, in regards to this story, much like the last story, I maintain my initial stance that, at this point in the juncture, given how topsy-turvy the news has been, I will believe it when I see it. These days, a fight really isn't guaranteed to come off until both guys are in the fucking ring. Then okay, they are gonna fight. These days, just announcing that a fight is official doesn't mean you're actually going to get to see it, no matter who's saying what. Anything can happen. Guy can decide to cook up an injury, one of those convenient injuries, fights off, and so-and-so is going to be fighting so-and-so. Given how difficult this fight has been to make, even though for all intents and purposes, it's your run-of-the-mill title defense. I mean, nothing against Anthony Yarde and what he could go on to become, but this fight has had so much back and fucking forth, you'd think this was a mega fight, and it's really not a mega fight, but it's got all the back and forth and the difficulties and the issues and the postponements of a mega fight, and that's what it's not. It's Sergey Kovalev, who's a bigger name and a more accomplished fighter and a world champion in a mandatory title defense against an up-and-comer. That's all it really is. And yet, this fight's getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. I mean, in all honesty. And who knows what's really going on behind the scenes? Who knows if it's a financial issue involving the investors, or maybe one side of it is dragging their feet because they don't really want to have that fight, but they don't want to, shame themselves. They want to try to save face. It could be any variety of things, but my initial stance, it hasn't changed. I'll believe it when I see it. When both guys are in the ring and the bell rings, then I'll believe it. Because anything between now and the proposed fight date can happen. And this news isn't dissimilar from anything we've been hearing already. I mean, wasn't it just a couple of weeks ago that Kathy Duva herself canceled the proposed purse bid from the WBO because she said that they'd agreed to terms? Here we are weeks later, when, right around the time the fight was supposed to take place. Guess what? Another purse bid canceled, and once again, what are we hearing? That they've agreed to terms. So, my stance hasn't changed because the news hasn't changed. I'll believe it when I see it.
Moving on. So I just caught Heather Hardy's fight on Bellator in the cage. I believe it was against Turner. I believe that's what the girl's name was. You'll forgive me, but I don't actually follow mixed martial arts, be it Bellator or UFC, K1, Muay Thai. I don't follow it, you understand? I don't follow it in all the ways that I follow boxing, but I managed to catch this fight because I did follow the career of Heather Hardy just in the realm of boxing. And, didn't go well for Heather.
A while ago, when Heather Hardy initially stated that she was going to be crossing over sports, that she was going to attempt to do both of them simultaneously, I warned that in doing so, these sports, they require a level of focus, a level of discipline that is a jealous level of discipline, that you can't be distracted. You can't divide your time between the two because then that means you're only giving both of them 50% of what you've got. And that an athlete could be courting disaster in attempting to juggle the two because they're two very different disciplines, that the muscle memory you develop over time as a boxer, for example, having competed as an amateur and subsequently as a professional, it's going to be different than the muscle memory one develops as a kickboxer or a jiu-jitsu practitioner or a sambo artist or whatever other disciplines are out there. It's going to be different. And for a fighter that has spent the vast majority of their combat career in one particular discipline, crossing over doesn't guarantee success. That you might have what it takes to be a successful boxer, but it's because you worked at it. Whereas, now at 37 years old, how much time do you really have to work at becoming a successful elite level mixed martial artist? At this age.
37 years old.
If you watch the fight, Turner, I believe her name was, she got on top of Heather Hardy, went in for the ground and pound, and Heather Hardy showed her toughness. I mean, she really tried to hang in there. She really tried to just hang on.
Try to survive.
Maybe she can make it out of the round. But she just couldn't get the girl off of her. She showed that while she's tough and she's gritty and she's a competitor,
she's green.
She also doesn't have the maneuvering capabilities, the necessary defense to reverse that situation, to turn the tide. There was very little that Heather Hardy could do against this Turner girl that was going in for a ground and pound, and that was after Turner had went in for a couple of what were rear naked chokes. And I really felt for Heather Hardy, watching her in that precarious situation, but I think that her reach exceeded her grasp, and I think the same is true for any boxer that thinks they're just going to climb into that octagon and it's all going to go well because you had success as a boxer. You might have had far more time to develop as a boxer than you will have had to develop as a mixed martial artist, and the same is true in reverse. If you have an extensive background in jiu-jitsu and kickboxing, for example, that muscle memory, that understanding, and those skills may not successfully cross over into the squared circle. Essentially, the best analogy for this would have to be a sports analogy. You can spend years and years and years and years upon years developing a home run swing in the sport of baseball. But, once you develop that home run swing ain't gonna mean shit on a basketball court or a football field.
Even though it's all sports.
Oh, you may have the conditioning of an athlete. Maybe you have certain things that might cross over, like stamina and reflexes, but overall there are still going to be elements missing because it is a different discipline that requires different muscle memory that is developed over time overall. I heard some of the comments from Heather Hardy that motivated this move to appear on this card, participate on what was this recent Bellator card, and the move itself seemed financially motivated. That things weren't working out, a couple of plans that they had to have some fights in the squared circle, they didn't quite pan out, things, didn't materialize, so it seemed like a spur-of-the-moment kind of move that was motivated by money. And, at minimum, you have to make that deduction that some portion of this decision to cross over and cross-train in these different sports, some portion of that decision was motivated by money, and I will say that, that's doing something for the wrong reasons. These sports are too grueling, too physically taxing, and require too much time, too much attention for money, just, money itself, to be a motivating factor. That, yes, of course, there's going to be some kind of enthusiasm, some kind of ambition to try to achieve something, but it is being motivated by money, and money in and of itself cannot be the motivation for such an endeavor. It's got to be something else. It's got to be genuine passion and love for what you're doing, because that's what it's going to take for you to be good at it. You could have a passion for painting fucking pictures. You can have a fucking passion for painting cars. But unless you have that same kind of passion for another endeavor, it's just not the same thing. And I gather that a lot of these different athletes that are thinking of crossing over, they're thinking of the money they could make, that they can supplement what they're already getting. But it's just not that kind of a situation, because it's not your run-of-the-mill 9-to-5 kind of situation. That, it's not, I got my 40-hour job and then I got my part-time job. Neither one of these disciplines is a part-time discipline. So my heart goes out to Heather Hardy for this endeavor. I think she's tough. I think she's ambitious. I think she's a world-class boxer. But at 37 years old, I think she's wearing herself thin trying to juggle both of these sports. I mean, that's another thing. The age of an athlete. If you're going to cross over and you're going to really try to have some success, you're not going to do that when you're 37 years old, okay? Your body's just not up for it. Everybody knows, anybody who's of age, that you're not the same person at 35 that you were at 25. I don't care how much you go to the gym, what have you. Everybody's human. Things slow down. So, my heart goes out to Heather Hardy, but this is what I was talking about. You just can't juggle these two disciplines. They're just too different. They're too different. They both require supreme focus, supreme attention, and in dividing your time, you're only actually giving the both of them 50% as opposed to 100.